Fight fans, it's Michelle Joy Phelps with Title Sports Network, and I'm joined now with my co-host, Dan Rafael. Dan, good to see you. Good to talk to you. It's been a few weeks, I think, for us.
Well, it's good to see you. Glad to see you back from your nice little vacation.
Yeah, I was get my tan on, Dan. Just get my tan on. Look, since we last spoke, so much has happened. I just want to jump straight into it if we can. Obviously with Ryan Garcia's suspension being announced, his fine. Let's talk a bit about that. And what can we expect now with the whole situation surrounding Devin Haney?
Well, Ryan Garcia is suspended now until at least April 20th, 22nd, I get, whatever the date of the fight was. I forget if it was April 22nd, April 20th, but he's suspended until that time next year. So at that point, he can then reapply for a license with the New York State Athletic Commission. And there's no guarantee that he'll get the license because he has to fulfill certain obligations between now and then, including making sure that he has clean drug testing. And so that's the earliest he could potentially reapply for a license. So if you can't get a license until that date, you know that the fight's not going to take place on that date. So it's still going to be probably a little while until he would actually have a boxing match. And in the meantime, as far as Devin Haney is concerned, I mean, he's I guess going to carry on with his career. He has a mandatory defense that the WBC has ordered that there was a purse bid for recently against Sandor Martin. It remains to be seen if Devin Haney will accept that fight, will take that fight. He was not happy with the purse bid amount that and what his take of it was. We have the interview that I conducted with Devin that's on Title Sports Network now, where people can hear his take about that. But either way, Devin Haney will get another significant fight, certainly before Ryan Garcia gets back in the ring. He's still the WBC 140-pound champion, at least for the time being. Even if he vacates that, he still will get some other opportunity. You can bank on that for sure. And in terms of Ryan Garcia, we'll probably see a lot of antics between now and next April, but one of them will not be in performing in the boxing ring. So he's on ice for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of which, because he's continuing to dominate the news cycle, I feel like every time I open up whether I'm even on television, TMZ, all over social media, he's always somewhere up to something. I mean, recently he was in an LA comedy store, did some stand-up comedy, or tried to do some stand-up comedy.
Sadly, I might
add. He's not really moving as though he has a suspension. He's not acting as though he's, his boxing career is going to be, like you said, put on ice for the next year. It's as if nothing's happened at all, and he's sort of enjoying all of this. What is your take on that?
I don't know if my take is that he's enjoying it. I just don't think it's really sunk in yet. I mean, that he's not going to be fighting, that there's no purse money coming in. He'll still receive the money that he's owed in terms of what the back end on his pay-per-view was. But remember, besides being suspended for the year by the New York Commission, he forfeited a $1.1 million, which was his contract purse. Most of the money he would earn on this fight, and the same goes for Haney, would be on the pay-per-view sales, but they still had a minimum guarantee that was on the bout agreement. So he had to forfeit the $1.1 million. And I would like to say that those who are saying that he was somehow railroaded, or this is unfair, or this was something that was a conspiracy against him, or however you want to describe it. Keep in mind one thing, Michelle, this suspension that was carried out by the New York Commission, the 1 year and the money, this was something that was a negotiated settlement. There was no hearing. This was the Nevada Commission and their lawyers having discussions and negotiations with Ryan Garcia's legal team. They all had to sign off on this. So nobody can come out after the fact, especially Ryan Garcia, and say that this was unfair and we've been railroaded here. His team agreed to take the 1 year suspension. His team agreed that he would forfeit $1.1 million. I can guarantee you that if they didn't do a settlement agreement, or I should say the reason that they did a settlement agreement, and this is just common sense, is if they didn't, they would have gotten a steeper punishment. Maybe they would have suspended him for longer than 1 year. They couldn't take any more money than the $1 million and $100,000 that was his purse. They also, by the way, fined him, which is the maximum allowed under the law in New York, which is only $10,000. So obviously that's a slap, but they did go the maximum that they could. So this is not something that he can say is everybody's against him. This was his own people and him signing off on this settlement.
Devin Haney feels that it's done a lot of damage to his career, his reputation. Let's talk about the civil lawsuit that Haney is talking about. What's going on there in that regard? Because there's been a few people who've come out online, some insiders who said that there really is no case when it comes to what Haney's trying to pursue against Ryan.
Well, I mean, anybody can sue anybody for anything, I suppose. I mean, that's just you can always find a lawyer that would be willing to file a lawsuit. I'm not sure what how they would word their action in their paperwork. But his perspective, which is something else that we spoke about on that interview I referenced that's on the Title Sports Network now, was that because of his loss, which he attributes to Ryan Garcia having used performance-enhancing drugs, which were in his system in multiple failed tests, not even including the fact that he came in over 3 pounds overweight, which, yes, he signed off on, so that you can't really get too much involved with that because Devin Haney did accept the payment to go through with the fight. But even still, that's his opinion, that he feels like if he's not on PEDs and he's not overweight, that he would win the fight. Now, we can never know that because you can't go back in time. But his perspective is because of that situation with the PED usage that he feels led to his defeat, that has injured his career. And he points to the fact that when the Sandor Martin mandatory came up for a purse bid, it was only bid on by one company, that was Top Rank, which is now the co-promoter of Sandor Martin. And they bid about $2.4 million, which would give Devin Haney a cut of about $1.5 million, which he made the point that for the last few years, since just a few fights into his first agreement with Matchroom Boxing, he's been making more than that. So he feels like he's been injured financially because of what occurred in the Ryan Garcia fight, because had he won that fight and Ryan had not been on PEDs, that the number of dollars that would have been bid on that fight would have been much higher, and there would have been more competition because it wouldn't have just been the one promoter bidding on the fight. So, that's his perspective. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but he's certainly entitled to take that point of view. And we'll see if they actually follow through and file some kind of lawsuit against Ryan Garcia because of it.
Ryan continues to maintain his innocence. He has I want to say almost like a cult-like following online, because you still get all of these people who have the facts, know that he is being suspended for using or being popped for the drug. But then there's a whole other group of Ryan Garcia fans that do not believe this is a conspiracy. Ryan's still maintaining his innocence.
Well, and let's just jump in here for a second about that. There's no maintaining innocence, because the reality is he failed several drug tests for the substance. So you can have a discussion about whether it was intentional ingestion or accidental ingestion. His team has made the point that they were contaminated supplements. That has not been proven one way or the other 100%. But the point is, in New York, the way that their rules work, and this is the same in California, it's the same in Nevada and plenty of other major boxing states, it's not a matter of that it's that how it got in your system. It's that it's there. And I've said this 1,000 times. It's the concept of strict liability. You as the athlete are responsible for what's in your body. So to give you an exaggerated example, because this obviously wouldn't happen. If you, Michelle Phelps, ran into Ryan Garcia's bedroom and jabbed him with a needle filled with PEDs and it tested positive after the fight, he would have a good reason to say, well, I didn't take it on purpose. This lunatic Michelle Phelps ran in my room and jabbed me with a needle and put it in my system. Now, that may lessen his punishment, but it would have nothing to do with the fact that it's still in your system, and that would still be a problem. So that is where he's at. It's in his system. Whether it got there by accident or on purpose is not even a relevant question in terms of being suspended. It was merely a matter of how long he was suspended. And again, I'll go back to the fact that his team, his lawyers, he's got experienced, knowledgeable, professional lawyers that handle this case, and they all agreed to sign off on the 1-year suspension and forfeiting $1.1 million. You don't just do that if there's no smoke along with the fire.
Well, aside from Ryan now going the comedy route or dabbling himself in that scene, now he's talking about UFC.
Yeah, good luck to him. First of all, he's got no experience in UFC and he get his ass kicked. That's the first thing. But here's the other more relevant point. The fact that he's now suspended by the New York State Athletic Commission. They oversee boxing events. They oversee all combat sports events in their state. He would be suspended for any of those activities. And so the same thing would be the case in any other state in this country. It's not like he could suddenly go to Dana White and the UFC and say, hey, while I'm suspended from boxing, can you sign me and I'll do a fight? And he's going to go have a UFC match, say, in Las Vegas. That doesn't work like that. He is suspended nationally for all combat sports. There's no way that any other state would license him, whether it's kickboxing, UFC, or any kind of MMA, boxing for that matter. This is not pick your sport. This is you are suspended by the commission for any activity in combat sports. So he will not be participating in UFC. He will not be participating in boxing. He will not be participating in anything other than maybe trying to hone his comedy skills.
Question for you. Do you feel that this whole situation has affected Devin Haney's market value?
Absolutely. You can just look at what the Sandor Martin purse bid was. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you can erase the loss from Devin Haney's record, which has been done. It's now officially a no contest, so his record remains undefeated. Ryan Garcia loses one victory because of the changing of the decision from a knockout or a majority decision victory for Ryan to a no contest. So you can say that he's still undefeated, but anybody that saw the fight, they know they saw him, get roughed up, get knocked down 3 times, and that you can't erase the person's memory of what they saw. So without question, it has impacted his marketability. I don't think it's necessarily the most fair thing in the world because, yeah, he got knocked down a few times and got roughed up by Ryan Garcia. But does that change the fact that he still went to Australia twice and schooled George Kambosos and became the undisputed lightweight champion? Does that change the fact that he moved up in weight and fought a very well-respected fighter in Regis Prograis, who a lot of people thought could win the fight, and he didn't just beat Regis Prograis. He knocked him down and won literally 12 rounds to 0 on the scorecards. You can't change those results either, but he's in a position right now because of what happened in this very high-profile fight against Ryan Garcia, that even with under certain unfair situations, such as the fact that this fighter was found to have performance-enhancing drugs in his system, and that he did not make the weight by over 3 pounds, which is highly significant for any boxing match, particularly in those weight classes, where you have struggled and stripped down and depleted yourself to make the 140 limit, but your opponent did not. And then after the fact admitted that he did it on purpose to miss the weight, that's all part of the story. But at the end of the day, you can't erase the fact that you saw, Ryan Garcia land those left hooks and drop Devin Haney 3 times and end up winning a majority decision. So yeah, it's definitely hurt his marketability.
Another thing I wanted to ask you is, about the Sandor Martin fight. We know obviously that's there. I know it's not of any interest to Devin Haney at this point, but I remember there being an interview with Bob Arum where he mentioned if he's willing to vacate the title, then he would be willing to make the fight between Devin Haney and Teofimo Lopez.
Look, that'd be a good fight. Teofimo's got to take care of his business. He's got a defense coming up on Saturday against Steve Claggett. But if Devin Haney's not going to go forward with the mandatory against that the purse bid took place for, go up against Sandor Martin for that belt, then he would be stripped of the title, and he would not have to defend that belt. So yeah, he could certainly be offered an opportunity to fight for one of the other belts. And certainly a fight between Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney, I think that'd be a marketable fight. That'd be an interesting fight for a lot of different reasons. So yeah, I think that's a possibility. Devin has worked with Top Rank in the past. He made a lot of money and put on some big fights with them, involved in both of the Kambosos fights, as well as his victory against Vasiliy Lomachenko. So he's familiar with how they operate, and I think that would be a perfectly fine fight. It's certainly, from my perspective as a fan, and I don't think I'm talking out of turn here, nothing against Sandor Martin, who's an excellent boxer, but doesn't have that kind of name, that kind of exciting style, that a fight between Haney and Teofimo would certainly be a more attractive fight for at least the American public compared to anywhere else.
Do you think that Devin Haney would vacate at this point to avoid not avoid, because obviously he's not avoiding Sandor Martin, but to rather take the fight with Teofimo? Do you think that he would?
Well, I asked him about it, whether he was going to go forward with the mandatory, and his perspective was everything was just fresh. The punishment for Garcia had just happened, the purse bid had just happened, and so he was going to kind of sleep on it and kind of talk to his team and think about it. He wasn't really sure what he was going to do. But I'll say this: if he's got the opportunity to fight for the WBO title and the lineal title against Teofimo Lopez for a much greater amount of money than $1.5 million and change, or defend the WBC title against Sandor Martin in a fight that's not as big of a deal commercially, then I think he probably would vacate the title. These guys are in this business to make their money and make their legacy. And he can increase his money and his legacy if he were to fight a Teofimo, because it's A, going to be more money, and B, it's a higher profile fight against the guy who's the actual quote unquote real champion of the division, because not only does he have one of the belts, but he's the guy that beat the guy that beat the guy that beat the guy. So I think that's certainly a possibility.
Okay, Dan, we're going to go ahead and take a break, but when we come back, we are going to talk about Top Rank versus PBC, the conversations that are the potential between Tank versus Lomachenko. But we'll be right back, guys. Hey, fight fans, welcome back. Dan, let's talk about the potential fight between Gervonta Davis versus Vasiliy Lomachenko. This is real talks going on at the moment. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great matchup. If you're a boxing fan, how could you not be pumped up to see that? That's an obvious kind of matchup. I mean, the key here is, can Top Rank and can PBC work together and make a fight? In the current environment, I guess it seems to be more easily done between these outfits. You can take a look at all the things that have taken place with the way that the Saudis have been able to bring all the promoters together and make fights. But I think in terms of Tank and Loma, what's the bigger fight for any of these guys? Because Lomachenko's coming off a brilliant performance against Kambosos, where he won the IBF title, traveled to Australia and beat him in an outstanding performance. You have Tank coming off of a tremendous performance and a devastating knockout against Frank Martin that was just a couple of weeks ago. And there's really, at least for my way of looking at it, there's no other bigger fight in the lightweight division in terms of fan interest or commercial viability than Tank against Loma. You could maybe say a Shakur Stevenson, and no disrespect to Shakur, who's also got his own defense coming up in a couple of weeks. But I think at the moment that the Lomachenko fight is a bigger fight commercially. And then Shakur will still be there a little bit down the road. Now, if you go back a few years ago, Michelle, back when Tank was being promoted by Floyd Mayweather, there you can go and find the videos on YouTube, and he was asked about that fight. And Floyd basically was like, no, we're not fighting Lomachenko now. We're not doing that. They were going to wait when it was the right time. They feel like now is maybe the right time, because now is a time where you would probably favor Davis to win, whereas 3 or 4 years ago, when Loma was still at the very top and Gervonta was not yet a complete fighter in the sense of his experience and what he's been doing, a lot of people would have probably picked Lomachenko. So even though Loma is really still an outstanding fighter, he's older. He's not what he once was. That's pretty clear. I'm not even sure what his motivation is to continue to box, because if you go back to the way that things were going on prior to the Kambosos fight, Loma didn't want to fight. He was going to retire. And he said, this is from him, talking about how I decided to do this fight because I did it because of my father, because my father wanted me to win another world title. Now, I'm not sure what his appetite is for yet another fight, but if he goes forward with it, look, it's a real fight. Maybe not what it should have been if it had taken place a couple of years ago, but I think a lot of fans would sure be interested in seeing Tank and Loma, the great puncher against a brilliant technician, who's also a pretty good puncher. Just two big names, and Top Rank and them are talking about it. I think it's got a real chance to happen.
I think it's great that we're actually seeing a few of these align, because you look at it and you think, if Tank versus Loma happens and then you get Teofimo versus Haney, the winner can face the winner of that fight, and that would just, for me, that's super exciting. It's a super exciting plan in the grand scheme of things, to think that those fights could potentially happen, because you're right. There was conversations, I think it was when Gervonta Davis fought in Atlanta, and I can't recall the top of my head against whom, but the post fight, when we were asking about who the next opponent was, Floyd Mayweather jumped in and definitely said, oh, well, it's going to be, within our stable or the PBC stable. So we never really got to see the options of Tank fighting outside of who was within that stable. And so now
it makes sense.
I want to ask you one thing, though, because you did say when he was promoted by Floyd Mayweather, is Tank not promoted by Mayweather Promotions anymore? Because my understanding is that he's still technically with them.
As far as I know, he's not with Mayweather Promotions. There was nothing to do with Mayweather Promotions as it related to the fight that he had against Frank Martin. Mayweather Promotions was not involved in any way, shape, or form with his fight against Ryan Garcia. So now the reason some people may think that they were still in alignment there is because Gervonta went out and hired Leonard Ellerby to work on his behalf, and obviously Leonard, for many years was was in charge of Mayweather Promotions. Obviously, recently he and Floyd split in terms of their business relationship, in terms of him being the CEO of the company, and Floyd has brought in Richard Schaefer. That was something that just occurred in the last week or so. So I think Leonard is still going to participate and work with Tank on his events, but not as it relates to Mayweather Promotions.
Okay. Yeah, because there is that blurred line. Because when you do see Leonard, you imagine it's Floyd, or you associate it with Mayweather Promotions. So I know that Tank at one point, I know that he has beef with Floyd, which is very evident all over social media. But he did at one point, when they were beefing, it seems like things were okay for a second, and that he continued to move forward with Mayweather Promotions. So that's why my assumption was that he still is technically under contract with them, but maybe it was a fight-by-fight basis. I'm not sure.
Well, I'll put it like this. If you looked at the build-up to the Frank Martin fight, it seemed pretty evident that he was not associated with Mayweather Promotions, because Floyd, in a very childish manner, went on his Instagram and his social media and was putting up pictures of the poster of Tank versus Frank Martin, and putting like red letters "canceled" across it. Like he was basically trying to tell his millions and millions of social media followers that this fight was canceled, therefore seemingly trying to harm the event and the pay-per-view. So clearly that would not have been in his best interest if he was still even involved as a promoter, because he would stand to reap financially on the fight. So yeah, they're not together anymore. That's long over.
What do you think of the sort of fallout between them? If you look online, you see that there are a lot of former Mayweather Promotions fighters who also speak out against Floyd Mayweather, and then you have Tank who's speaking out against Floyd Mayweather. What is your thought on all of it? Because it just seems a bit odd that it's like all are against Floyd, when at one stage Floyd gave them the floor and the opportunity to advance their careers.
Well, it's unfortunate, because Floyd obviously is a great fighter, was one of the greatest fighters of all time, and had a brilliant career, and could have been a force in the promotion business if he wanted to turn his attention to that. But it seemed to me that in trying to build up the young fighters, it's hard. And this is not just about Floyd. This is sometimes about, I think Oscar De La Hoya has had to come to grips with this. I think he's done a much better job in recent years than he did earlier on. But when you're the guy that's always been in, the guy and the one that's the focus of everything, and then you take a step back and you're the promoter, the idea is now the boxers that you're promoting are at the forefront, and they're the ones that take the center stage. And that you, as the former fighter, as big of a star as you may have been, you have to sort of take a step back. It's not about you, the promoter. You have to turn your attention and make your fighter the bigger name. And I think Oscar has adjusted to that, better in recent years in terms of bringing the shining the light on his guys instead of on himself. Floyd, I don't think had yet come to grips with that and adjusted totally to that. He's still quasi-active, not as a professional and doing professional fights, but doing these exhibitions. So still, I think, craving some of that attention. And when you've got somebody like Tank Davis, who's got the kind of personality that he does, and he wants that spotlight, there's going to be that friction. I'm not saying that it's, that it could have been worked out, but clearly there was an issue there. And also, Floyd was leaving the business end of things primarily to Leonard, and really wasn't involved in any meaningful manner, at least that I could see, on a day-to-day basis. And Mayweather Promotions really hadn't done any boxing shows of consequence in the last, I guess at least a couple of years anyway. They don't have very many fighters under contract. They do have Carmel Moen, an outstanding young up-and-comer, that turned pro on late last year, who's a superior talent and an outstanding prospect. But Floyd does not seem to be all that interested in promoting. Now, maybe that will change because he has brought on Richard Schaefer, who obviously has massive experience and had a great relationship with Floyd when Richard, as at that time the CEO of Golden Boy, was the guy that promoted a ton of the biggest Mayweather fights. I mean, Oscar was certainly the Golden Boy, was always there also, but the guy that was doing the day-to-day and the heavy lifting, so to speak, was Richard. So we'll see if Richard and Floyd can sort of get the Mayweather Promotions brand back on track and start to do some events. But I'll tell you this, Michelle, I don't care how good of a promoter you are. If you don't have a broadcast partner in this business, you got nothing.
Well, in some other news, the purse bid was canceled because a deal was reached between Joshua Buatsi and Willy Hutchinson. Let's talk a bit about that and what you know about that. Okay, so that's a fight that was ordered a couple of weeks ago for the vacant interim WBO light heavyweight title, because at the moment their champion, Arthur Beterbiev, is injured and is not going to be fighting for a little while. And when he does come back, he's got the fight scheduled
rescheduled against Dimitri Bivol for the undisputed title. So they made the decision to allow the interim title, and the fight was ordered between Buatsi and Hutchinson. This was after Anthony Yarde had been ordered to fight Buatsi, but Yarde is in his own contract situation with Frank Warren and was not available. So they went to the next guy, and that was Hutchinson, who was coming off the big win over Craig Richard on the 5 versus 5 card. Anyway, so the purse bid was supposed to be on Monday. And before the purse bid took place, the WBO announced that the purse bid had been canceled because the two sides had reached an agreement. Now, I am told, and I had written this probably over a week ago, that the plan was, if they could make a deal, and now they have made a deal, that fight would go on what's shaping up and what will be a huge card September 21st in London at the Wembley Stadium, where the main event will be Anthony Joshua. And now this fight between Buatsi and that interim light heavyweight title fight between those guys will take place on that card, and that's going to be a big time show, and this will be one of the good fights on that undercard.
Yeah, I'm speaking of Anthony Joshua. Obviously, it's not officially announced, but from all of our understanding, it's going to be Daniel Dubois unless something changes in the last minute. Just what are your thoughts on Anthony Joshua versus Daniel Dubois?
It's a great matchup. I mean, if you're, first of all, for the British fans, it's two of the top heavyweights in Britain, two big punchers, two guys that have had their story told and that the fans are familiar with and have had their ups and downs. If there's a fight that can fill up Wembley for Anthony Joshua, certainly Dubois as the opponent is certainly one of those guys. They both look good in their recent fights. Remember, this was originally the thought was if because Dubois is coming off the victory over Filip Hrgović that just took place a few weeks ago, that the plan was if Hrgović was the winner, that he would be Anthony Joshua's opponent. So it only makes sense that since it was Dubois, who again for the Brits anyway is an even bigger name opponent for AJ than Filip Hrgović would have been, then that's going to be the likely fight. And so he won in that fight against Hrgović, the interim IBF title. They went through the whole back and forth about whether Usyk would be stripped or not. They allowed him to keep the belt for a bit longer after he won the undisputed. So at the very least, you'll see Joshua fight Dubois for the interim title, more likely because of the situation that was part of that ruling by the IBF, that by the time this fight takes place, a few months from now, that IBF title will become Daniel Dubois. He'll be elevated because they'll either Usyk will go through with vacating as he's supposed to, or he'll be stripped. But the bottom line here is that Joshua will ultimately, unless something radically changes, when they get in the ring on September 21st, it'll be AJ challenging the IBF champion, Daniel Dubois, which will make it's already going to be a big event, but it'll just add a little bit more to it with the belt, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, well, Dan, thank you so much for joining me this morning. Later this week, obviously, we're going to go ahead and preview the Bam versus Estrada fight and Lopez versus Claggett, which are both happening this weekend, this Saturday. But thank you for coming on and having this discussion. And let's see what news breaks in the next couple of days, because you seem to be the front leader there in breaking news.
I try. Always a pleasure being on with you, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye, Fight fans.